Now that the first week of LCK is over, I want to look at how they have been approaching the meta. Alright, so I made a graph of all the champion picks so far and their presence. Basically, the small gray bar represents the number of times they've been picked, and the larger bar behind it is just the number of picks plus bans. But that total number is what I'm going to be referring to as the champion's presence. I also sorted the champions by role, so left to right it's top, jungle, mid, AD, and support. Akali and Ryze have different colored bars since they were played both top and mid, but I think they were both played mostly mid. Also, just to reiterate, this is from week 1, so there's going to be a total of 24 games. Starting from the top lane, we see that Graves, Gragas, and Tryndamere have been really popular. I haven't been able to find win rates for specific matchups, but I would think that Gragas has become more popular as a counter against Tryndamere because of his tanky and ability to kite with body slam and ult. I'm actually going to skip jungle for now, but I'll talk about that later. But instead, let's talk about mid lane. We can start off with TF, who's pick or ban right now, and TF being TF, he's really good in pro play, but I think with TP changes, it makes his ult really strong pre 14 minutes, and that's why he's so high prio. In addition to TF, I'm not too surprised to see the priority around Corki and Victor since they've been really strong in solo queue as well. But it's also nice to see champions like Leblanc come back because I know she's always a pro play staple, but we didn't see her too much last season. Leblanc is mostly an answer to Corki since she avoids that really stale laning phase that Corki Victor matchups usually have, and she can roam with her mobility and provide a lot of solid gank setup. Alright, moving on to bot lane, Caitlyn has the highest presence as ADC, which I can't really explain why very confidently, but I do know that she has a very strong early game which can translate to turret plates as well as lane priority for junglers. The reason I'm a little bit doubtful about this Caitlyn priority is because even though she uses lethal tempo pretty well, she still opts for fleet footwork sometimes, and I don't think her changes justify being a pick or ban. Other high priority AD carries include Jhin, who I think will almost always be in meta in pro play because of his long range utility with W and ult, as well as his great late game scaling. And Aphelios, who scales really well and is versatile in teamfights with Gravitum for utility, Infernum for AoE, and Red White for high DPS. Based on how teams have been playing, I think a lot of team comps are built around a strong ADC and therefore focus on peel and kiting over dive comps. So I'm also really surprised to see that Jinx is not pick ban right now since she is in almost every other region. It's really interesting to see that Jinx has below a 20% presence in LCK, whereas in other regions she has almost over an 80% presence. Either way, I'll keep an eye on that and see if that changes over the next couple weeks of LCK. Just to briefly touch on supports, Karma and Yuumi have been really popular, shortly followed by CC Tanks, Leona and Nautilus, which I think will typically be strong in pro play. I think that enchanters are really popular right now because of the high damage in the game, so champions like Yuumi and Karma provide a lot of survivability while also being able to buff their damage carries. Now that we've established the champion pools and other roles, we can go ahead and look at jungle. In terms of team comp building, the goal of jungle right now is to have a strong early game to help lane scale, and then become a nuisance in the mid-late game. Sin and Zenzao are really popular, and it's because they're able to fill that role. Sin has a really strong early game presence and can be used to a late game with his playmaking tools. Zenzao also has a strong early game, but is hard to deal with later. He causes a lot of disruption in teamfights, and with Goredrinker Sterax and his ultimate, he becomes really annoying. Going back to Sin, I do want to point out that despite his really high presence in LCK, his win rate is actually really bad. For some reason, his win rate's below 20%, but Zenzao and J4's win rates are above 60%. His win rate is pretty good in all the other regions too, so it's kind of funny how LCK's Sin win rate is really bad. Regardless of if there's a reason behind this or it's just really unlucky, I thought it was important to point out. Anyway, that's my quick recap on the first week of LCK, and I hope you enjoyed.